Retirement often comes sooner than planned. If you have little saved, you'll need to be ready to live lean, pious, like millions already do.
When you look up information about retirement, you often see huge numbers like 500,000, 700,000, or even $1 million needed to live comfortably. But the truth is very different. Every year, millions of Americans retire with very little savings or none at all, and still manage to get by, often living quite well. That's why in today's video, I want to share the real picture, how people without much money are still able to sustain their lives in retirement. This is also one of the most common questions viewers ask on this channel, and the answer may surprise you. When we talk about retirement, the conversation often circles back to savings, because savings are viewed as the foundation of financial security in later years. But when we look at the actual data on what Americans really have saved, the numbers tell a very different story compared to the headlines. According to the Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances, the median retirement savings for those between the ages of 45 and 54 is only about $115,000. By the time people reach the ages of 55 to 64, which is the decade when many begin seriously considering retirement, the median climbs to around $185,000. For those already in the 65 to 74 age bracket, the median savings is approximately $200,000. These amounts are dramatically lower than the popular recommendations of $500,000 to $1 million that we often see suggested as the minimum nest egg required to retire comfortably. It is clear that the majority of Americans are far from reaching those lofty figures, and yet millions of them still transition into retirement every single year. To put these numbers into perspective, let us consider what $200,000 really means for someone stepping into retirement. If you follow the commonly suggested safe withdrawal rate of about 5% per year, that $200,000 portfolio would generate only $10,000 annually. $10,000 spread across an entire year is less than $1,000 a month. When you compare that to the rising cost of living, medical care, housing, food, transportation, and other daily expenses, it becomes obvious that such an amount on its own is nowhere near sufficient to support a comfortable lifestyle. It is not enough to cover even modest living costs in many parts of the United States. This is why relying on savings alone as the single measure of retirement readiness can be misleading. The truth is that most retirees do not have $500,000 or more in their investment accounts, and yet they still find ways to make retirement work. The median numbers show that ordinary Americans are working with a much smaller base of savings. This reality highlights the importance of understanding other factors like Social Security benefits, household income from a spouse, home ownership status, lifestyle choices, and sometimes even part-time work after retirement. Savings play a role, of course, but for the typical retiree, they are not the sole source of financial security. Instead, savings serve as an additional cushion or supplement rather than the entire foundation. Looking at the data makes it clear that while many financial advisors set high targets, the lived experience of most retirees is different. They are entering retirement with far less than recommended, which forces them to adapt, cut costs, and rely more heavily on other income streams. The key takeaway is that the actual state of retirement savings for the average American is modest, and the widely promoted figures of $500,000 or $1 million do not reflect the financial reality for most people. When discussing retirement, it is common to hear about full retirement age at 67 or the benefits of delaying work until 70 in order to maximize Social Security payments and allow investments more time to grow. While that advice makes sense on paper, the reality of when people actually retire looks quite different. In the United States, the median retirement age is 62. That means half of retirees leave the workforce before 62 and half continue working after that point. What is striking, however, is that nearly 60% of retirees say they stopped working earlier than they had originally planned. This early exit is not usually a matter of choice, but often the result of circumstances outside of their control. Health issues are one of the most common reasons, since medical problems can make it difficult or impossible to continue in the workforce. Job loss is another major factor, especially in industries that favor younger workers or undergo downsizing. Burnout and exhaustion also push many people into an earlier retirement than they had anticipated. This gap between the ideal retirement timeline and the reality faced by most Americans is why planning becomes so critical. Many financial experts encourage people to keep working until they reach the official full retirement age, or even longer. But the truth is that life events often cut careers short. That is where a concept sometimes called the 5-year rule comes in. The idea is simple but powerful. Instead of planning and saving as if you will retire at 65, build your strategy around the assumption that you may have to step away at 60. By pretending you will retire 5 years earlier than your target, you push yourself to save and invest more aggressively. If life forces you into retirement early, you will be better prepared with extra resources to soften the transition. If you decide you want to retire early by choice, you will already have the financial means to do so. And if you continue working until 65 or later, then those additional years become a bonus, giving you a larger cushion and greater financial security. This approach recognizes the uncertainty of life. None of us can fully predict job stability, health, or changes in family circumstances. By planning for an earlier exit, you essentially give yourself options. You reduce the risk of being caught off guard by unexpected events that push you out of the workforce before you feel ready. It is a way of building flexibility into your retirement planning rather than assuming everything will go according to schedule. In summary, while the official numbers suggest that people should work longer to maximize benefits, the real world shows that most Americans are not making it to those ages. With a median retirement age of 62 and most leaving earlier than expected, saving with the 5-year rule in mind creates a safety net. It ensures that whether you retire early, on time, or later, you are financially prepared to handle whatever path life sets before you. For most retirees in the United States, Social Security is the single most important foundation of their financial lives. While many people talk about pensions, investments, or other assets, the reality is that for the majority of Americans, their monthly Social Security benefit represents the bulk of their income. Most individuals begin claiming their benefit around the age of 65, although technically they can start as early as 62 at a reduced rate or delay until 70 for a larger payout. In practice, most people fall somewhere in the middle because they need the income to cover basic expenses. As of recent data, the average Social Security check for a retired worker is about $2,000 a month, which adds up to roughly $24,000 per year. On its own, that is not a lavish income, and for many living solely on Social Security as a single person can feel extremely tight. Now, imagine that the retiree also has some modest savings, perhaps around $200,000. Using the 5% withdrawal rule, they might be able to safely take out about $10,000 annually from those savings without depleting the balance too quickly. Adding this to the $24,000 from Social Security brings the total annual income for an individual to around $34,000. While this is not extravagant, it is often enough to maintain a modest but workable lifestyle, especially if major expenses like a mortgage are no longer present. Things look even more sustainable when we shift focus from individuals to households. The vast majority of retirees do not live alone, but instead with a spouse or partner. In this case, both partners may be drawing Social Security benefits, effectively doubling the monthly income. Instead of just one check worth $2,000, there are now two, bringing the combined amount to around $4,000 a month or $48,000 a year. When you then layer in the same modest savings of $200,000 generating $10,000 annually, the total household income rises to approximately $58,000 per year. That level of income can provide a far more comfortable retirement, covering necessities with room for discretionary spending on travel, hobbies, or supporting grandchildren. This difference between a single retiree and a retired couple is important because it highlights how household structure dramatically affects financial security in later years. While one person living on $2,000 a month may feel constrained, two people pooling their Social Security checks can create a much brighter financial picture. This explains why median household income figures for retirees tend to be much higher than individual figures. What emerges from this analysis is that Social Security, although often criticized as inadequate, plays a vital role in sustaining millions of Americans in retirement. It forms the backbone of income, and even modest savings on top of it can make the difference between just scraping by and living with some comfort. For households with 2 Social Security checks, plus even a small investment balance, retirement can be surprisingly manageable, showing that the system, while not generous, does provide a reliable and essential foundation. One of the most significant factors that determines whether retirement feels manageable or stressful is the question of housing and debt. Housing is usually the single largest expense in any household budget, but many retirees have an advantage that younger generations do not. Nearly 80% of Americans aged 65 and older own their homes, which means they are not paying rent every month. On top of that, a majority of these homeowners have already paid off their mortgages, so they no longer carry the burden of large monthly payments. This is a huge advantage because eliminating a mortgage that might have been $1,500 or more each month instantly makes a modest income stretch much further. A retiree living on $2,000 a month from Social Security alone would struggle if they still had to make a rent or mortgage payment, but without that obligation, the same income can cover utilities, food, transportation, healthcare, and even some discretionary spending. That difference can mean the gap between constant financial stress and a relatively stable lifestyle. However, not all retirees are completely debt-free. Data shows that the median non-mortgage debt for retirees is around $11,000. This includes obligations such as car loans, credit card balances, personal loans, and even some lingering student loans in certain cases. While the amount may not sound enormous compared to a mortgage, any debt payment reduces monthly cash flow and can quickly become a burden when living on a fixed income. Credit card debt in particular can be dangerous because of high interest rates. Even small balances, if not paid off in full, can grow and eat into limited retirement resources. Car loans are another common type of debt that retirees carry, and although they provide necessary transportation, they also represent another monthly bill that must be accounted for out of a fixed budget. The key insight here is that the fewer debt obligations a retiree has, the more flexibility and security they will feel. This is why financial experts consistently recommend entering retirement completely debt-free, not just without credit card balances, but ideally without a mortgage or car loan either. When income is limited to Social Security and perhaps a small draw from savings, every dollar of debt repayment is a dollar that cannot be spent on daily living needs or healthcare. Going into retirement debt-free means your Social Security check goes directly to cover current living expenses instead of being eaten away by obligations from the past. Retirees who achieve this position often report a sense of peace and independence because their basic living costs are drastically lower. In practical terms, owning a home outright and not having monthly debt payments creates a financial buffer that makes modest retirement incomes far more livable. It turns Social Security from something that feels inadequate into something that can actually sustain a stable lifestyle. The conclusion is clear. If you want retirement to be easier and less stressful, pay off your debts before you leave the workforce. Eliminate credit card balances, finish paying off car loans, and do everything possible to clear your mortgage. Reaching retirement with no debt at all is one of the most effective ways to ensure your limited income goes further and that your later years can be lived with greater comfort and freedom. When evaluating retirement readiness, it is not enough to only look at income sources because income alone does not determine comfort or struggle. What truly matters is how income compares with spending, and actual spending patterns among retirees tell an important story. The data shows that the median retiree spends about $34,000 a year, which breaks down to roughly $2,800 per month. That is the midpoint figure, meaning half of retirees spend more and half spend less. On the other hand, the average retiree spends closer to $58,000 a year, or about $4,800 per month. The difference between median and average is significant because the average is pulled higher by wealthier households that have larger incomes and higher lifestyles. For most retirees, the median number gives a clearer picture of what typical retirement spending actually looks like. Another important trend is that spending in retirement is not static. It tends to follow a pattern. In the early years of retirement, many people spend more because they finally have the time to travel, pursue hobbies, or enjoy experiences they could not fit into their working years. However, as people age into their mid-70s and 80s, spending tends to decline across almost every category. Travel slows down, entertainment expenses shrink, and many simply stay closer to home. The one category that usually rises is healthcare, since medical needs increase with age. Even so, the rise in healthcare spending is often offset by declines in other categories, so total spending still trends downward as retirees grow older. This decline in spending is important because it shows that while retirement calculators often assume steady or rising expenses, the real-world data demonstrates that most households naturally reduce their costs over time. Now, when we compare spending patterns with income sources, the picture becomes clearer. A single retiree living on Social Security of about $24,000 a year, plus withdrawals of $10,000 from modest savings, ends up with an annual income around $34,000. That matches almost perfectly with the median spending figure. It is tight, but it works. For a couple drawing two Social Security checks worth $48,000 a year plus $10,000 from investments, the total of $58,000 aligns closely with the average spending figure. This illustrates why so many retirees are able to manage even without large savings accounts. Their income, primarily from Social Security, lines up with what they actually spend, particularly when major debts like mortgages are no longer part of the budget. The takeaway from these numbers is that retirement does not always require the high spending levels that people fear. In reality, typical retirees live on between $34,000 and $58,000 a year, depending on household size and lifestyle. Social Security, modest savings, and a frugal approach are often sufficient to meet those needs. This alignment between income and spending is how millions of Americans make retirement work, even without the million-dollar nest eggs often recommended in financial headlines. Another major element in understanding how retirees manage with little or no savings is the role of supplemental income. Retirement is often portrayed as a complete departure from the workforce, but in practice, many older Americans continue to work in some capacity well beyond the traditional retirement age. Data from the Social Security Administration shows that a significant portion of people between the ages of 62 and 64 still have earnings, with about 68% reporting income from work. Even among those who are slightly older, in the 65 to 69 age range, nearly half, around 47%, still generate some form of employment income. As individuals reach their 70s, the numbers decline, but do not disappear, with approximately 30% of people aged 70 to 74 continuing to earn money through work. These figures illustrate that leaving a full-time career does not always mean leaving work entirely. For some, the choice to keep working is driven by financial necessity. Social Security benefits may cover only basic living expenses, and modest savings may not provide enough flexibility. A part-time job or a small side business can supply an additional income stream that makes life more comfortable, covering costs such as healthcare, transportation, or discretionary spending. Even a modest income from part-time work can significantly improve cash flow and reduce the pressure on limited resources. For others, the motivation is not strictly financial but social and psychological. Work provides structure, purpose, and opportunities for human interaction that might otherwise diminish after leaving a long career. Many retirees enjoy the sense of contribution in the community they find in part-time jobs, consulting roles, or volunteer positions that come with stipends. This social engagement can also improve mental and emotional well-being, which is a key part of aging successfully. What is important to recognize is that supplemental income changes the equation for retirement planning. When financial experts talk about living on savings and Social Security alone, they may paint a picture of scarcity. But the reality is that millions of retirees are still generating income, even if only part-time, and this extra money helps bridge the gap between limited savings and actual living costs. It is not unusual to see retirees working a few days a week, freelancing, or turning hobbies into small sources of revenue. This trend highlights the flexibility that retirement can offer. It does not have to be a hard stop where work ends entirely. Instead, for many people, retirement means stepping away from demanding full-time roles and replacing them with lighter, more enjoyable, or more manageable work that still brings in income. In practical terms, supplemental earnings, even at modest levels, can make the difference between just surviving and feeling financially comfortable. Combined with Social Security and perhaps small withdrawals from savings, this income allows retirees to live with more confidence and security. The prevalence of work among older adults shows that retirement is not a single uniform experience, but a diverse set of choices shaped by both necessity and personal preference. For millions of Americans, the formula for retirement is simple yet effective. They rely heavily on Social Security as the backbone of their income. They benefit from having their homes paid off, which eliminates one of the largest expenses, and they maintain a frugal lifestyle that stretches their limited resources further. Many also have a small amount of savings to draw from and are willing to take on part-time work if necessary, creating a modest but workable financial picture. This combination proves that it is possible to retire without a million-dollar nest egg and still enjoy stability and even happiness. Retirement for most people is not about luxury but about managing expenses, staying debt-free, and making the most of what they have. At the same time, the message is not that saving and investing should be ignored. Building financial reserves is what creates freedom, flexibility, and the ability to choose how you spend your later years. The greater your savings and investments, the more options you have to retire earlier, travel, or simply live with less financial stress. The takeaway is that retirement can be achieved with modest means, but planning ahead gives you the power to shape it into the life you truly want. Share your retirement goals in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more insights.